Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture we're going to talk about some additional exam tips, and basically I've created this lecture based on student feedback and recent student feedback. So basically people have gone and done their exams and they've either passed or failed, and then they've come onto the forums and they've told us, what came up in their exams and where the course hasn't adequately covered certain topics. And so what I'm doing is I'm adding slides as we go to make sure that this is addressed so you have the best chance of passing. So if you do go on to do your exam and you find out that I haven't covered something specifically in this course, if you could just let me know in the forums, and then I'll continue to update this lecture with more and more slides as we progress throughout the year. So let's start with Amazon's Kinesis, and I'll just read you the Amazon definition of what Kinesis is. So Amazon Kinesis is a fully managed service for real-time processing of streaming data at massive scale. You can configure hundreds of thousands of data producers to continuously put data into Amazon Kinesis Stream. For example, data from website, click streams, application logs, and social media feeds. Within less than a second, the data will be available for your Amazon Kinesis applications to read and process from the stream. So let's talk a little bit about what it actually is. And Kinesis is basically a way to consume big data. It's a way to bring big data onto the cloud. So you might have an app that monitors social media feeds like Twitter, like Facebook, etc., and it's looking for positive or negative language. Perhaps it's looking for market sentiment. So let's say you work in the oil and gas industry and you want to know whether or not people are thinking that oil prices are going to go up or down. And you can ingest huge amounts of data from social media stream, and your applications can then say, there's 80% positive language about the price of oil at the moment, or 90% negative language. And then you can use this information to then decide whether or not you want to buy or sell oil. So that's the sort of thing that Kinesis is used for. So in the exam, if you get a question which is talking about a way to consume social media feeds or something, along those lines, or a way to consume big data, I want you to automatically think of Kinesis. The other thing is around processing that data. So you can use a couple of services on Amazon to process big data, and what you need to do is look for the language that they're using in the question. So if they're using language like business intelligence, for example, I want you to think of Redshift. If they're talking about things like big data processing, then you want to look for Elastic MapReduce. So just remember, if you see a question in the exam on big data, for consuming it, for bringing it into the cloud, think Kinesis, and then for applying business intelligence to it, think Redshift, or for any kind of big data processing, think Elastic MapReduce. Okay, so moving on to EC2, and some questions will talk about having EBS-backed instances or EBS-backed volumes versus instant store volumes. And I want you to just imagine a volume is basically a virtual hard disk. So you can either have an EBS-backed virtual hard disk, or you can have instant store hard disks. So these are where your, like your root directories or your C drives if you're using Windows. This is basically where that data is stored. So EBS-backed volumes are persistent, and that simply means that they continue independently to the life of the EC2 instance. Instant store-backed volumes are not persistent, and sometimes they're described as ephemeral. And that means that you can't basically detach an instant store volume and attach it to another EC2 instance. That instant store volume is only going to be valid for the life of that EC2 instance. So, like I said, EBS volumes can be detached and reattached to other EC2 instances. So you can have additional volumes like your D drive. For example, you can mount and unmount that, and then you can go and attach it to another instance. And we do this in the SysOps course. You don't really need to know how to do it for the Solutions Architect exam. What you need to know, though, is the difference between EBS-backed volumes versus instant store volumes. So just remember that EBS volumes can be detached and reattached, as opposed to instant store volumes cannot be detached or reattached to other instances, and they're only going to exist for the life of that EC2 instance. Okay, so the other thing you need to know is EBS volumes can be stopped, and the data on that volume will persist, so you won't lose the data. Whereas with instant store volumes, they can't be stopped, and if you do, you can have an EC2 instance where the root volume is an EBS-backed volume, and then it has additional volumes attached to it, which are instant store volumes. And if you stop that EC2 instance with the root volume being EBS-backed, everything on your instant store volumes will be lost. So you lose all that data. So for this reason, it's called ephemeral storage, and it just means that it's not going to be persistent. Whereas with EBS volumes, it is. And typically where you're going to see this in exam, just think of EBS backed as being a good place to store your data in a long-term fashion, whereas instant store data, you shouldn't, or instant store volumes, you shouldn't use them for long-term data storage. So if you see the keyword ephemeral, ephemeral simply means it lasts a very short amount of time. Think instant store. If you want to store your data for a longer period of time, then you want an EBS-backed instance. Okay, so the next thing I want to cover is OpsWorks. And OpsWorks is essentially an orchestration service that uses Chef. And Chef is a way of maintaining or turning your infrastructure into code and then maintaining a consistent state across your infrastructure. Now, we do cover this in the SysOps course in a lot more detail. We'll show you how to use OpsWorks. We'll go into different labs where we're creating different stacks and applying code and rolling out new versions of our code and seeing how that affects our stacks. But for the purposes of the Solutions Architect exam, you don't need to know too much about OpsWorks. All you need to know is what it is, and you need to look for certain keywords. So if you've got a question that's talking about Chef or about recipes or about cookbooks, I want you to immediately think of OpsWorks. If you are interested in learning how to use OpsWorks in more detail, check out our SysOps Administrator exam. Just remember going into the Solutions Architect exam, though, that OpsWorks is essentially an orchestration service that uses Chef. Next thing I want to talk about is Elastic Transcoder. So Elastic Transcoder is a way of doing media transcoding in the cloud. Basically, you convert media files from their original format into different formats that will play on things like smartphones, on your tablets, on PCs, etc. And the cool thing about Elastic Transcoder is you don't need to guess what settings work best for a particular device. So if you've got a video that you want to transcode to a let's say an iPhone 6 Plus, you don't need to guess what settings would work best for a 6 Plus. Elastic Transcoder has that intelligence built into it. And in terms of how you pay for Elastic Transcoder, it's based on the minutes that you transcode and also at what resolution you're transcoding at. So just remember those points going into the exam. If you see anything about transcoding videos for mobile devices, think Elastic Transcoder. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is simple workflow and the 3 different actors. You will need to know the names of the 3 different actors going into the exam because you can get questions saying which of these is not an actor, or select the 3 that are, or select 2 valid actors. So let's just have a look at what the different actors are. So you've got a workflow starter, and this is just basically something that kickstarts a workflow. So it could be like your e-commerce website when you go to place an order, or it could be a mobile app when you go in and want to search for bus timetables or something, and it kickstarts a workflow process. So your workflow starter is an actor. Deciders essentially basically control the flow of an activity task in a workflow execution. So if something has finished in a workflow or if something has failed, a decider will then decide what to do next depending on what's happened in that workflow. And then finally, there's the activity workers themselves, and they carry out the activity tasks. So if you do get a simple workflow question about actors, just remember that there's workflow starters, deciders, and activity workers. And finally, the last thing I want to cover off is we do this in the SysOps Administrator course. It's not covered in the Solutions Architect course, but I have been told by quite a few students that this can come up in the exam as well. And that's just around getting things like the public IP address of an EC2 instance and how to do it. So what you need to do is query the instance's metadata, and you can actually do this on any EC2 instance that you spin up. You can run either the curl or the get command, and then you use HTTP and then 169.254.169.254, then /latest, and then /metadata, and it will tell you lots of cool things. So you can go in and experiment with that on your own. If you want to learn how to use it in more detail, we cover it in the SysOps Administrator course. And the thing you need to remember going into the exam is that it's an instance metadata. It's not the user data. You're after the metadata if you're going for things like the public IP address. And also try and remember the actual IP address itself. So 169.254, and then it just repeats 169.254. So that's it for now, Cloud Gurus. Good luck on your exams. If you do see something that does come up in the exam that you feel that the course hasn't covered, log into our forums at acloud.guru and just let me know. And then I'll keep updating this lecture with more and more slides. And you're really just helping other people make sure that they also pass, and that you're helping me in the sense that the course is covering every single topic that is going to be asked in the exam. So that's it. Keep being awesome, guys. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.